This morning's panel will cover the unique options in solar project finance. We have an impressive lineup of speakers that we'll hear from, but before we get started, I'd just like to thank a few people. Our founding sponsor of New York Energy Week, NYEW, our terawatt sponsors this year, Con Ed, National Grid, and NYEW, our board of directors, and our steering committee. Thank you to Nixon Peabody for hosting us in this lovely space, and the AES Corporation. Sharon Hillman will come and give a few words on the AES Corporation. She's the Vice President of Market Policy and Business Development for that organization. Sharon?
Good morning. I'm really impressed to see all these seats filled so early in the morning in New York, so that's pretty impressive. For those of you who don't know the AES Corporation, we're not exactly a household name at this point, although hopefully that will be changing at some point. We're a global energy company. We operate in 19 countries. We have 36,000 megawatts of generation, about 25% of which is renewable. And we have 11 million customers, many of them in South America, but also in the US, primarily in the Midwest. And we're very happy here to be sponsoring the Solar Breakfast. And we, as many of you know, have a leadership position in certain segments of distributed energy, which is growing, primarily in storage, where we have over 100 megawatts in operation and 1,000 megawatts in construction, as well as we now have our US-based but internationally focused distributed energy business out of Boulder, Colorado. So welcome, and look forward to listening to the panel today. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Next, we'll get right to the panel discussion. I'd like to introduce to you all Evan Conley, the Business Development Manager for NRG Home Solar. Evan is on the business development team and focuses on market and product development. He's also an MBA candidate at NYU Stern School of Business. He's a co-president and board member of the Young Professionals in Energy chapter of New York City. Evan, please join me at the podium.
Okay, good morning, everyone. How are you? This is going to be fun. We're joined by an outstanding group of panelists this morning just to simply talk solar. On my right, Eli Hinckley is the clean energy lawyer and partner from Sullivan & Worcester and runs their energy practice. Min Lee is the director of Solar Energy Technology Office at the U.S. Department of Energy. Laura Stern is the president of Nautilus Energy and an elected board member of SEIA. And Mike Zimke is the managing director of capital innovations at SunEdison. Look, it's an exciting time in our industry. Solar now represents 1% of global energy capacity. And here at home, in the first quarter, there was more PV capacity added than natural gas. And this type of growth has required not only a tremendous amount of capital, but also innovative methods for deploying it. And unfortunately, we do not have enough time this morning to fully take advantage of the expertise of each one of our panelists. But we're going to spend the next 30 minutes doing our best to cover the major trends. And we'll have a 15-minute Q&A session at the end. So let's get to it. Min, during our preparation meeting, the only topic that was raised by all four panelists was community solar. Would you mind describing that for the group? And then talk a little bit about what's going to be needed to finance the up to 11 gigawatts by 2020 that you had mentioned.
Great. So the Department of Energy actually started looking at community and shared solar business models, and we published a paper back in 2010, so pretty early on when there was pretty much no community and shared solar. Our definition was pretty wide and encompassing back then. It included models whereby you might have group purchase programs, which is now being implemented pretty widely across the country. Started off in Portland as a solarized type group purchase programs to effectively lower costs through group purchase, but it also encompasses models whereby businesses and consumers can purchase part or fractional part of a larger array, take advantage of the economies of scale. And that's actually the area that I'd like to discuss, and I think a lot of our speakers would like to discuss today because it's a strong market opportunity. A research paper that was published by the Department of Energy and the National Renewable Energy Laboratory about a month and a half ago pointed out the opportunity here for community and shared solar business models to grow in the United States. We're looking at anywhere between 5.5 to 11 gigawatts of market potential by the year 2020, just over the next 5 years or so, and it's really an exciting market segment. Representing $8 to $16 billion of potential financing that's required to enable that market segment to grow. What's really exciting about this market segment, I think, is that approximately 50% of consumers and businesses can actually not put on-site solar on their buildings or structures. And New York City here is a prime example. You generally have high-rise buildings, multifamily housing units, and that's not really suitable for solar directly on that structure. So community and shared solar models offer that potential and economies of scale. And with some work that we did with the SEC earlier last year, it clarified some investment opportunities.
Great, thank you. And Mike, how does community solar fit within the SunEdison model?
Well, as Ming said, it just provides access to more customers. We like it for that reason. In Minnesota and in Massachusetts and in the East, the model, one, it's a credit enhancement in the sense that like a rooftop solar, if the customer goes away, you have to replace them. Versus in a community solar setting, you can find an alternative off-taker because it's a centrally located system, and you can sub in a new off-taker to keep that cash flow going over time. On our YieldCo Terraform, they're a huge supporter of the program. We have huge opportunities in Minnesota, as I mentioned, and also focusing in the East in both Massachusetts, New York, and other states as they open up.
Great. Yeah, speaking for NRG, we view community and shared solar as just a really outstanding opportunity at the retail and a commercial level. And so similarly, Mike, our two firms also recently structured YieldCos. Could you spend a few minutes kind of discussing that process and some insights here for the group?
Sure. So Terraform, our YieldCo, it's a unique platform. I joined SunEdison in December, and it's just having a captive equity on your team is just so unique. So you can structure many different products. In particular to community solar, it's just valuable to have them, one, as obviously captive equity, low cost of capital, but also to help structure the product to make it financeable. We are targeting multiple markets, and they're super supportive of the effort.
Great. So Laura, in a similar vein in terms of access to customers, you'd mentioned that the financing of non-investment grade counterparties was both a challenge within the kind of commercial sector, but also a very big opportunity. Could you share some perspective here?
Sure. And we view EnerKnol Solar is a full services energy solutions company. We also do third party asset management. So we are really in all the active commercial industrial markets in the U.S. and Canada, and we really see differences. If you want to look at between the U.S. and Canada in terms of financeability and accessibility to rooftops, and a lot of the rooftops in the United States are considered non-financeable by means of the fact that their host customers are not rated or not investment grade rated. And we think this is probably upwards of 80% of the potential commercial industrial market. So as we look at going forward over the next few years, this is probably the biggest growth area for us. And one of our goals, and everybody here is participants in the industry. Everybody's goal should really try to be to reduce the cost of financing these projects in general, and part of that is accessibility of non-rated customers to financing vehicles such as YieldCos and other vehicles that are available in the market.
Great, thanks, Laura. And Eli, just A few minutes ago, over coffee, we were just talking about this same topic. Do you have any thoughts here?
Sure, and I'd actually be interested in the audience's perspective on this. Of the people in the audience, how many have been attached to either supporting or actually driving the development of a solar project? Most of you. How many of you successfully developed a multiple project pipeline of small commercial? Wow, that's more than I expected. You just ruined my point. No, this is the part of the market that hasn't been exploited yet. We've seen lots of success down the market in residential solar, where you can use FICO scores to manage credit. You can standardize very easily, and obviously we've seen lots of success at the utility scale of the market. But small commercial is hard, and it's hard because of credit risk. It's hard because standardization is very difficult, and it's hard because you've got lots of little projects which have their own little nuances, and you're practically out to build them. But against that, you have very high margins compared to the rest of the marketplace. This is the place where the money is left in this market. And so for those participants that can figure out how to manage credit risk, how to manage standardization, and how to get better at deploying the actual assets on rooftops, there is a huge market opportunity here. I think Mike probably has a follow-on point to this, because I know they're thinking about this market. So what we're seeing now is finally the development of the necessary tools to actually make this market go. Some of it's driven by need as the market demands more assets, and it becomes thinner and thinner margins around the residential and the large scale stuff. People say, let's look there, and we'll figure out the tools now. So there's a little bit of necessity driving invention. But against that, we are seeing some real progress. We're seeing new and better tools around managing the credit profile of the off-takers at the small scale. And it's a diverse and messy pool, so being able to do that is not easy. Standardization remains challenging, but taking different approaches to standardization, working with your advisors to structure programmatic approaches as opposed to project-by-project approaches, really starting to gain some traction. And so, to my view, this is the next top market, and that we're seeing people start to manage things like credit risk and standardization well, makes this, for the next 18 months between now and the end of ITC, this is where the action's going to be.
Yeah, I was going to say, Eli, that's so one of my jobs at Sun Edison is indeed focusing on small commercial on the structured finance side. So we are launching a small commercial fund, and all the points that Eli just mentioned, on the asset side, which is a key element, which is standardization of the projects themselves, convincing your independent engineers and your appraisers to do more of a sampling approach to the asset due diligence rather than a project by project, because if you're just doing project by project, you end up with a regular DG fund, and it's just not going to scale. But then on the credit side, we focused for the last number of months in developing our own credit scoring mechanism, and which we've gotten Terraform to sign up to. But again, these are companies that banks already lend money to on a regular basis. These are middle market companies with strong balance sheets. They've been in business for a long time. And so we believe from a tax equity perspective, they're already that investment horizon of sort of 7 years for a partnership flip, or 8 years. They're already exposed to these same companies over that time frame. So and so it's really Terraform that we have to convince, because they're going to be the long-term owner over the 20-year life cycle or the 30-year life cycle. And I think we've done that. And so we believe our business model will generate 150 to 200 megawatts of these small commercial opportunities by the end of next year.
Yes, Laura.
I would suggest that what we're looking at is really a different definition of what messy is, because we've been at this for about 9 years now, negotiating with host customers, and we have never seen one that will sign a standard contract. So our approach is really to kind of clean out the noise and really focus on what the critical elements of any contract should be, and make sure that there are no red flags around the other real estate and other issues, and have a different definition of messy, because in order to get the volume that the yield codes need, that the market needs, we have to kind of focus on really the important default risk items, and a lot of what's focused on now are not really critical default items, and we don't have any CNI studies of default history, but I would suggest that the very few defaults are due to host customer credit and non-payment.
Well, that's actually a great point, and I've actually had some discussions and written a little bit on this recently. One of the places we're seeing new investors come to the small commercial market are the real estate owners and investors themselves, because they understand the default risk, right? They've gone through and thought about, what does my occupancy risk look like? What does my default risk look like? Because I already have a relationship with the off-taker of the space. There's no reason I can't layer on the same analysis to the off-taker of the power associated with the space, or the occupancy risk of the space. So absolutely.
Great. Yeah, thank you very. That's very exciting. And so Eli, what Laura mentioned and what the rest of the board panelists mentioned is, it seems like a really exciting way to fill commercial solar development and industrial solar development pipelines. But when we were preparing for today's meeting, you made a remark that, look, there's just simply not a lot of great PPAs out there at the utility level in our industry. So what's going on here?
Well, we see some friction in the utility scale space, and this is true not just in solar but across the board. There's not a huge appetite for utilities to sign long-term commitments for power. I think some of it's uncertainty. I think some of it's that they can wrap the uncertainty in part of the discussion around not making long-term commitments for power. And you've also got the fundamental shift that a lot of the regulatory requirements that were driving the utilities to act, especially in the renewable space and the solar space, have been met or are clearly in places they will be met. And so getting that commitment for a long-term offtake for a large-scale project becomes a little bit harder. And we've yet to see anybody really open up. We've seen some stuff around revenue coming from the renewable attribute side, and you sell the electricity on a merchant basis. We haven't seen anybody really go out and try to build merchant solar. And if you look at the natural gas market, everything that's getting built is on a merchant basis. So if you want to build at scale, part of the next evolution in that part of the market is going to be thinking about, how do you do this on a market basis, and can you compete on a market basis, which gets difficult when you look at a post-ITC world.
And you just touched on the elephant in the room. So Min, given the kind of industry dynamics in the 2017 and beyond world, can you share some updates on the Sunshot Initiative and some other cost reduction goals?
Sure. And for those in the audience who know the history of Sunshot, we actually launched it in 2011, with the premise that any technology, whether it's solar, wind, or iPhones, won't be widely adopted unless it's really cost competitive. And we set the benchmark for ourselves to be cost competitive with conventional energy generation sources by the end of the decade. And so that was a very ambitious goal back in 2011, and we were planning when we were planning for it in 2010. The cost of solar was quite high. In fact, it was about 4 times higher than that of conventional generation sources when you don't factor in the subsidies for the solar. So a very significant price decline was going to be required to be achieved over the following decade. I'm happy to report that we're roughly halfway into this decade-long initiative, and the industry is about 70% of the way towards our 2020 goals. So if you roll back the clock, for those who were in the solar industry back then, utility-scale solar was approximately 360, 380 or so watts. We set a goal to get to $1 a watt. You can probably buy utility-scale solar for around $1.50 a watt today. So a dramatic progress since 2011. A lot ways to go in order to get to 2020. Now, keep in mind the current law on the books is for the ITC to transition from 30% down to 10% for commercial customers, and then down to 0% for residential customers. So that's what's currently on the books. It's been a very effective policy in terms of growing the solar market. We have over 20 gigawatts of solar on the across the U.S. today. That's significantly up from when before President Obama took office. More than 20 times as much solar across America today, and it's leading to very dramatic job growth. Over 174,000 jobs across America, probably close to 250,000 jobs in the solar industry by the end of 2016. Now, of course, with the current law on the books, that's set to the ITC being set to drop, and I know SEIA has been been pushing hard to extend the ITC, and then there's other proposals out there to phase that down. But looking at that cliff, that will be a very significant shock to the system, and certain segments of the market will probably fall significantly. Utility scale segment will probably drop, but the residential commercial segment, I think, will still have some life. It will probably drop a little bit, but it'll still have some significant opportunities. So that said, in a long way, I think we've made a lot of progress as a sector in terms of lowering the cost of solar. When I speak to industry leaders now, they're telling me that they'll get to the sunshot goal targets by the end of the decade, if not sooner than that. And so that's a very dramatic change in attitude from when we convened industry stakeholders back in 2010, and they pretty much said, you guys are crazy. So it's really exciting to see that change in mindset and all the opportunity that, the reason why this whole room is full is that you guys are all participating in this market. You were not in this room, 5 years ago.
Yeah, thank you, man. And so, Laura, from the Nautilus Solar perspective, how does the ITC reduction kind of affect your go-to-market?
We are, I would say, hopeful, not necessarily optimistic, but hopeful that the ITC will be extended. We're concerned that, looking at the history of wind and other extensions, that it's not going to be extended enough time for people to actually plan for the extension, that it might be extended retroactively or very late relative to the actual deadline. And given that, we are also optimistic that other programs such as 111D, the Clean Power Plan, and statewide initiatives, and even local regional initiatives will help supplement some of the absorb some of the shock of the potential loss of the ITC. But we are also planning on there are many states right now where we are at grid parity with the ITC, but without state incentives, and we think that focusing on those areas will allow us to continue regardless of whether the ITC drops to 10% or not.
Great. Mike, any?
Yeah, I think so too, and I think in the wind space, there's been ebbs and flows on the PTC, but I think for all of us in this industry, something has to give. So tax equity returns may have to change. Yield co returns may have to change. Obviously costs are coming down. And then the small commercial market we talked about earlier, where the margins are a bit better, can support less tax credits. But I think all of us would be incentivized to make the deals work going forward, and I think that's likely to happen.
Yeah, we certainly have some smart people in the room here that help us figure it out on the way. Eli,
well, I might just throw into the tax equity or the tax extension and tax equity conversation. There is a simplicity that's going to come with the end of the ITC. And a developer or an owner's ability to self-utilize the credits and the depreciation is a whole lot more manageable and efficient when it's a 10% credit and the depreciation than it is in the 30% credit. And so if you take the need for some of that tax structuring out, right, you already have a pool of assets that have some amount of income production, you add a new asset, you don't necessarily have to go out and find a tax equity investor. Finding a tax equity investor is expensive. That money is expensive. The structuring is expensive. The lawyers that do that are expensive. Not expensive enough, but no, it clearly takes a big challenge out of the marketplace. And so I think we do free up some capital that otherwise hasn't come into the market. And I think Mike hit it. I mean, the margins in the small commercial space are high enough that they probably absorb the loss on the ITC side if you get these tools in place. And so, again, another reason to think about that market is you're looking forward at the future of solar.
Great. So Eli, that the perfect segue here. So given some of the lead times for some of the larger utility scale projects, one would assume that some post-IT structures are kind of either being developed now or at least kind of being whiteboarded. Could you add any context there?
Well, I think the first piece is looking at what the cliff is causing, and that is if you're not able to convince somebody that you're in the ground complete absolutely by probably October of next year, you're not going to get a commitment for tax equity at this point. People aren't going to play with that back end. Eventually somebody will step into that market and recognize there are huge margins to be made on the people who are trickling out of the backside. But right now, you've got to be lined up and done. And so for small projects where you've got a shorter window, 4, 5, 6 months of construction, you may still have a development cycle. But for any very large projects in the marketplace, you probably have to be positioned to be starting construction now or very soon in order to have access to tax equity.
Eli, what's your view on? I also think like in markets like in the East where you have SRECs, I think that's another area where, the market dynamic will dictate, changes in SREC prices to make the numbers work as well.
That's right, and Laura touched on that. There are certainly states, and we will see a shift in some state policy to provide a little more support, whether it's regulatory nature or some sort of direct support in the form of tax credits, and state policy will drive a lot of opportunity as well.
And challenges at the same time. I mean, there are fights going on right now across net metering and other policies, RPSs that can also provide headwinds.
Yeah, and when we, looked at the ITC extension, I think we've just been talking about in terms of an extension or non-extension. There's a much higher probability that we will get a commenced construction into passed as part of the as part of one of the bills that it's being proposed in, so that just looking at the 1603 grant, commenced construction and safe harboring. Process, we saw projects. I think there's still projects now that are being applied for Treasury grants, and that expired at the end of 2011, I think. So I think commenced construction can actually get, a few years of a tail out of that as well.
Yes, certainly that shift would make for an exciting end of next year.
Yeah. And so, look, Min, you mentioned some, possible positive or negative state changes in terms of regulatory and policy frameworks. Just talked about the ITC step down or elimination of that incentive. And so, Mike, look, at NRG and others in the market, we're certainly seeing solar positioned less and less as a standalone product and service, and really kind of coupled with other either technologies, products, or services, right? Retail energy, battery backup, storage. So when we were preparing, you mentioned some other initiatives at SunEdison, kind of a wholesale to resale and storage.
We have what we call wholesale to retail. These are grid-tied systems, primarily in PJM, where which take advantage of SRECs. But these are front of the meter, not behind the meter systems that sell wholesale into PJM, and then we look to contract with an off-taker for a contract, a term of years, say 10 years. Where they're sort of pay fixed, and they get a floating savings from PJM based on the solar provided. But what we also think is they're ideally suited for storage as well, for frequency regulation. So we are, and in fact, I was on a call last night looking at some economics where you would add a storage system to one of these wholesale or retail assets, and to look at the increased cash flow. This is another area where having a yield co can be advantageous because they're aligned with us. Whereas if you're trying to find third-party equity to look at a new technology like a battery, you're going to have a harder time. So we have alignment there, and we'll get support from Terraform. But I think even without ITC on the battery, I was still seeing numbers make sense. And to the extent that you can get an ITC on the battery and it flips into 2017 where they're 10%, that additional revenue stream could support a 10% ITC on the solar side potentially. So that's areas where I see adding technology can help.
And on that note, not to flip this totally upside down, but you guys are doing some of the same stuff at the residential level, thinking about aggregating technologies in a way that makes them leverage the benefits of one another. Maybe you could provide a little bit of that to everybody.
Yeah, sure. Eli's going off script. I'm happy to oblige here. So at the core of NRG Home, which is the residential focused business unit within NRG Energy, there's a belief that there's an opportunity to deliver homeowners unique energy products that are sustainable. And so solar right now is one of the leading drivers of getting access and providing energy savings to a homeowner. But it's really easy to start envisioning a future in which, and forget customer service aside, but optimum triple play, right? Where you have your TV, your phone, and your internet to buy one service provider, NRG will hopefully be the #1 provider. We're working hard to do that, but be able to say, look, we can offer you residential solar if that makes sense, or community solar like we were discussing earlier, as well as electric vehicle charging stations, retail energy, and other outstanding products and services that really give consumers for the first time choice on how they spend their energy dollars. So that is at the core of our strategy, and it's going on today, and we'll continue to do so as we kind of become like a 21st century energy company. And so now I'm totally off where my talking points are. Okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I mean, for us, we don't even limit it to combining technologies. We just look at what's more valuable to our customer, and so we have a partnership with one of the major roofing companies where we're cross-selling the solar and the new roof at the same time. So for us, it's really just about providing value to the customer, and a customer finds a lot of value in a new roof. Probably much more tangible value than they can appreciate through energy savings upfront.
No, that's outstanding. A good point, and thank you, Laura. And Min, from a Department of Energy perspective, what's the view on solar storage integration and some of the other opportunities we're talking about today?
Yes. So currently across America, there's approximately we have approximately 2% of our electricity generation capacity derived from solar energy. So that's a fairly modest amount of solar energy across America, and it's even smaller than that, about 0.5% of electricity generation by kilowatt hours, by energy. And so still very small, but we also see the growth trajectory. There's more solar installed every quarter than there is other forms of energy generation. So the additional capacity that's being put online, with solar, which is an intermittent resource, is significantly higher than will grow significantly higher. And so the challenges of more solar and wind and other DG sources onto the grid is going to be significant, not necessarily today, except in certain markets, but into the future. And so I start to get a little concerned when renewables, start or solar starts hitting the 15, 20, 30% range. And so I'm looking at technologies today that can integrate more and more renewables on the grid. And so battery storage, energy storage is certainly one key aspect of that. But it's also about the integration of demand response, if you will. And so earlier this year, my office released a $15 million solicitation around the integration of PV with storage, with building energy management systems behind the meter. And we'll be making award announcements in a couple of months on that program. So exciting technology development that can solve the problems for tomorrow or even today in certain markets.
Great, thank you, man. Eli, do you have anything to add?
Well, I guess this goes back to our conversation earlier, which is there's clearly a huge opportunity where you start to integrate technologies within the single point of use. Right? Solar is a piece of the wedge, but you actually think about all the different things that use power within the building envelope of the home. There's a lot of opportunity to manage those processes better. And as a single provider, making that simple for the consumer, especially from anybody below the level of scale that has an energy manager, doing that in a way that's easy to integrate is vital, but huge opportunities. And this obviously, it helps drive the solar market because it eventually becomes a pull for the solar market because everybody goes to a solution like this. And this is where we logically jump into our discussion about utility death spiral, right?
Sure, please, by all means.
I was sort of joking, but no, you have the EV in EV charging integrated piece of this, which is actually sort of an interesting side of it from the utility standpoint. And we are now way off the solar script, but that's a place where, in addition to commercial solar and some of these sort of collective sets of technologies being integrated, electrification and the utilities driving that is maybe the most exciting part of this market, I think, that is yet to be untapped. We spend more. Somebody can stop me anytime. We spend more every day on liquid fuels for transportation than we do on electricity. If you own an electric company, you're not thinking about how do I get a piece of that bigger market. You're just leaving money on the table.
I totally agree. I think electrification of our vehicle fleets will provide utilities the opportunity to participate in this transitioning energy economy. I mean, we're here in New York City, right? So it was around 1896, I believe, that Thomas Edison actually built the first utility to power Lower Manhattan. It's really not that long ago in the grand scheme of things, right? And so, and that model was a model whereby you have central power generation connecting to your cities with transmission lines that spread out to distribution networks that power your homes, factories, and businesses. That model is being upended today with distributed generation and the advent of two-way power flow. And so that transition is going to be very disruptive to current market participants, and certainly many are fighting back. But I think electrification, as you pointed out, will provide a tremendous opportunity. And another aspect of this I would want you all to think about is that I start to worry a little bit about economic parity when we start to do this transition, and that's happening right now. Remember, a large segment of our population, the low and moderate income population, generally are not the ones putting solar on their rooftops, right? And they're not the ones buying electric cars today. Okay, and so there is a concern, of course, of cost shifting that takes place, and that's why I want to bring the conversation back to community and shared solar, because it's an opportunity whereby lower and moderate income households can actually participate in this energy transition.
Perfect. Thank you, man. Hey, Laura, when we were having coffee preparing this morning, you started talking about the robust asset management practice within your firm. I think it'd be really relevant to a lot of people in the audience if you could just talk a little bit about that.
Sure. And we started doing third-party asset management probably a few years ago. And now I think we're the largest asset manager, third-party asset manager in Canada, with over 100 megawatts under management. It's something that we grew internally, and it is, we realized it ourselves first with our own portfolio and with our third-party entities, and now even more so as we see so many projects shifting hands through yieldcos, through other acquisitions. It's, a lot of projects are being vested in their 5-year ITC and are changing hands, and there's such a need to to continue to provide asset management care to these projects, regardless of what vehicle they reside in. And so we see this as, obviously, as the installed base of solar grows, this is going to be a huge market and a huge opportunity for, increasing value of all the hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars of investment that, everybody here is working on.
Please, may I have your attention, please? We're conducting a test of the building's fire alarm system. Disregard any horns or strobes.
Thank you.
May I have your attention, please?
Apparently we've talked to you. We have our attention.
The building's fire alarm system. Disregard any horns or strobes.
Well, I just wanted to add to what Laura was saying. So yeah, big focus at Sun Edison. Obviously, we can fund all these assets, at the beginning, but really to make sure that you can have distribute your cash flow to your investors is to make sure that the systems are actually operating. So it's a big focus is the asset management side to optimize the cash flows, because there's a huge value in doing so.
Right, and we provide both physical and financial asset management, and we find that that it's a lot more traditional perspective to have to focus on the physical asset management, but these structures are so highly they're complicated with tax equity, flips and other types of structures, that we find the financial asset management is equally, if not more important, in terms of the project may be running, but if if the SREC revenue went to a different account, you're no better off than if it had not been running.
That's right.
Well, great. So before we have three additional minutes here before we transition to audience questions. So it's kind of an open opportunity for any one of our panelists to roll out a point that we didn't have on the agenda, but one that's worth making everyone aware of. I realize I just put you on the spot, so we can go to.
Well, let's talk about residuals. So
Sure.
How does NRG view residuals?
I'm gonna take that.
Well,
Not gonna.
These are 30-year assets, so obviously it's a big discussion that we have with Terraform all the time as to you have a PPA term of 10, 20 years, but these assets last a lot longer than that. So it's how you value that tail, and it depends on the asset. So community solar, it's easier to look at, or if you have site control for 30 years, like these wholesale or retail, there's huge value there. But if you have a rooftop behind the meter system, you have to look at it differently. So it's a challenge to, and I just don't think, I think that it's a sector that still needs more discussion. I don't think it's a mature market in terms of looking at that residual, because you get out to the end of the contract, there's hardly any contracts that have been to the end. Maybe a few Walmart deals or whatnot, but what is the customer decision at that time? Are they going to renew, which we obviously want them to do? Or are they going to hand it back, which a lot of the PPAs that are out there have the provider paying for the removal, which is no fun. So it remains to be seen. So there's still a lot of work on that residual analysis, I think.
Yep. Thanks, Mike. Anyone else on that? Min, Laura, Eli? Perfect. So with that, we're just in time for audience questions. So we have about 15 minutes. Saw the hand up right here. Yes.
So we're in New York City. We talked about changing utility models. We've talked about integration, hybrid systems, storage, but no one yet has mentioned REV. Maybe, Min, do you want to, or can you give DOE's view on New York REV and how that might serve as a model going forward in other jurisdictions?
Well, I'm certainly very excited about what the state here is looking at, trying to create market-based solutions. I think in many ways, there's actually few states actually even looking at this right now, and I think, certainly New York is one of the leaders. When you look at solar and other technologies, in many ways, the regulators are behind the curve. Okay, rates are not set. Rates are set in most places to achieve certain goals. Okay, and they're not necessarily set in terms of what it actually costs to deliver that energy to the consumers. So I think REV is an exciting new development. I think they're still working out the details, a lot of details around there. But having that conversation and engaging, all the major parties into that, I think is extremely important. And that transition hopefully will happen smoothly without the utility death spiral, as most people refer to. And I'm hopeful that can happen. I think the leadership at the governor's office, as well as NYSERDA and other New York agencies, is very strong here. And I'm very excited to see what is happening, because especially because there's also a focus on resiliency, on avoiding cost shifts, as well as integrating storage and valuing that in the new energy future.
Great, thank you. Anyone else like to add a comment? Okay, we can go to the next question. Yep, Samir.
Actually, I have two questions. So one is for Min. You talked about Sunshot and the ITC. What are some of the international developments that are impacting the solar cost structure? The second one for Laura and Mike. You guys talked about PPAs and I'm kind of wondering about how the market would be in terms of hedging. How would sort of hedging vehicles help for the development of solar projects? We've talked a little bit about PPA risk for 30 years. What kind of products would exist to affect that or impact that?
So if I take the first question about the international developments around solar, so in the face of ITC, so I would challenge the businesses who are in this space, to look beyond the ITC, because certainly the ITC is an important policy mechanism in the United States that enables solar to deploy here. But what about, look at the rest of the world. As the rest of the world, developing countries start to electrify, are they going to go to, are they going to follow the track that Western nations have done over the past 100 years, or are they going to leapfrog us? Okay, and in many cases, it appears that they will leapfrog us. A lot of countries will move straight to renewables and a lot of more distributed generation. And so, if you're able to run a successful business in America, okay, in a post-ITC world, imagine what market share you can capture globally. If you can reduce your costs, if you can have business efficiencies, and process efficiencies that enable you to scale, for example, in South America and in other parts of the world. And I think that's a tremendous opportunity. If look beyond the United States here. I mean, there's certainly plenty of market opportunity, but if you can develop your processes, your businesses that's scalable, then you can potentially capture a greater portion of the global market.
Yeah, and the other piece of this is that the price for electricity in the U.S. and there are other jurisdictions where it's cheap is relatively inexpensive. We have a well-structured, fulsome power grid, not all that well maintained necessarily, but it's there, and it, as a construct, it produces relatively low-cost electricity compared to most of the rest of the world. I mean, if you want a marketplace, I don't know, what are there, 80 or 100 million people in the Philippines? The average price of power is 24 cents. There's a market, go, right? So there's lots of opportunities to leverage what we've learned here and what we've learned in Europe and export that to markets where, on a simple pricing balance, there's plenty of opportunity to grow and improve technology and application.
Great, thank you, Eli and Min. And Laura, I think there was a second question about hedging.
I mean, hedging, if you don't have a PPA, obviously, most investors like contracted cash flows. That's just the nature of the business. So that even though, yield cos can take some merchant risk, of course, but they prefer contracted cash flows, and we do look at the IRR of our contracted cash flows. So markets that, for example, in PJM, where you have this wholesale to retail, you could instead of a PPA structure, you can contract with a bank. Or like they do in ERCOT for the wind space, you enter into a swap where the bank provides a fixed price and then they take the floating risk. And then also there's some hedging done in the SREC market where you contract with a utility to buy some of your SRECs for a period of time, which helps you on the financing side. I don't know, Laura, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I mean, we think there's, getting back to the non-rated host customer question, we think there's a huge opportunity for credit derivative types of structures to be applied to PPA counterparties, given that right now there isn't even a higher margin or a higher return applied to host customers who are not investment grade. It's just completely binary. It's financeable or not financeable. And we think that there is a very big market to apply an opportunity, a very big arbitrage opportunity to apply a credit derivative type of structure to these projects in order to get them financed. And again, you'll see those margins in there. I mean, a part of it's difficult because a non-rated customer is still just buying electricity, and they don't pay more for their electricity than an A-rated customer. So there's a bit of a disconnect in terms of charging them more for solar because their credit is not as good as their neighbor who is an A-rated customer.
And that's a great point. Thank you, Laura. And yes.
I'm just interested, we've seen in other industries like computing and telecom, we've seen the cost of technology drop quite rapidly. So computing, we all know, we're familiar with Moore's Law. What does the panel think about advances in solar technology as it relates to reduction in cost in a post-ITC world?
Yeah, so the question for everyone else is, using the telecom industry as a good example, are we going to have a similar kind of reduction in cost and improvement in technology here that'll help us grow and develop in some of the ways we discussed earlier? So does anyone have any thoughts?
Yeah, so you're referring to Moore's Law, and actually the solar sector equivalent is called Swanson's Law, named after Dick Swanson, the founder and CEO of SunPower. And it's really not a law, it's really a trend line. It's an observation that for every doubling of global manufacturing, cumulative global manufacturing capacity, there's roughly an 18 to 20% reduction in the price per unit. And so it's actually really interesting that this kind of cost reduction kind of trend is actually true in many industries. It's true in computer chips. It's true in solar. It's actually true in beer making as well. So basically, the premise is that as you make more of something, you learn how to make it better. You learn how to make it more efficient. You generally scale your factories, and so you get some economies of scale. And that's been going on for the past 30, 40 years. That trend line has followed, pretty smoothly on an exponential curve, on an exponential graph. Which everything looks straight on a log graph. That said, I'm very optimistic about the opportunities to lower the production price of PV modules further. I fund a lot of that R&D. The Department of Energy over the past 35 years have funded well over 50% of the world records for solar cell efficiencies. That's the first step in making technologies cheaper, more efficient, etc. So I'm hopeful that the cost curves will continue to go down. So you can buy solar panels for roughly 65 cents a watt today. I think First Solar just announced 2 days ago that they built a thin film 18.6% CAD-TEL module, okay, which is actually higher performing than an average multi-crystalline silicon module, and they're doing that for roughly 40 cents a watt. And so there still continues to be opportunities in lowering the hardware costs, but we're getting to the point where the hardware is no longer the key cost driver. Okay, the hardware now costs less than half the cost of a system, and so the opportunities to lower costs further. I think a lot of it is in terms of finance costs. A lot of it's in terms of other soft costs, improving business efficiencies, reducing permit times. On average, it takes perhaps up to 6 months for residential customers to get solar on the roof. Nowadays it's probably closer to 2 to 4 months, but that's still a significant amount of time. And if you can shorten that time, there's nothing that says that solar can't be installed on your roof in one day or a week. And so we're trying to challenge state and local governments to reduce the processes that it takes for a consumer to go solar or businesses to go solar, and that of course will reduce actual costs to developers and ultimately the customer.
Thank you, Min. We have time for some more questions. Yes, Michael.
Question regarding commercial solar, the opportunity in commercial solar. The panel spoke about that. Could you elaborate a bit more on kind of the scale that you define as commercial solar and what types of opportunities you see, and in particular, does it interface at all with? Does it interface with community solar, for example, when you talk about commercial solar?
Well, scale-wise, I kind of know. We're hundreds and hundreds of megawatts between now and the end of next year for Sun Edison.
Per unit.
I meant like in terms of kilowatts, like you're talking about 100 kW, 500 kW, up to a megawatt.
What the costs are?
Where the opportunities?
What you put in the commercial solar bucket?
Oh, so I don't know, 500 kW to 20 megawatts.
Wow.
It just depends on how it's defined. Like these wholesale to retail, projects could be up to 20 megawatts, but we kind of define them as DG, distributed generation. I think it all depends on where you work and how you define it. But it sort of sits on on the DG side. It doesn't really sit on our utility scale side. So I don't know. We could have larger systems because with this community solar, you can have these ground mount systems that are quite big, but you have you have distributed generation or CNI type offtake, so it kind of falls into that DG bucket versus a utility scale where you have typically one offtake.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Mike. Some questions in the back of the room. I saw some hands earlier. Yes.
Hey, going to T-Rex. You guys have talked about a lot of the doom and gloom with the ITC falling off a cliff at the end of 2016. But I've also picked out a few different points. Mike has talked about the long-term cash flows and that attractiveness for investors, more traditional investors like you see in more mature asset classes that have access to capital markets. Eli's talked about tax equity and how it can effectively be democratized, going down to only 10%, where the actual user can use it, which I think was part of the original intention of tax equity. I think Min's point is probably right, that there is some fall off in development, but could it also not be seen as an opportunity for this longer term and broader base of capital to come in and at least fill the incremental 20% that you're losing in the capital stack, if not more of it, and thus provide more capital long term to the industry?
Well, when you think about the long term, I don't think there's any question that's right. Is there potential for some bumps along the way as we figure out sort of what this process is, and as we continue to fix both the technology cost and the soft cost and the process to get it to the right place in terms of the economics? There is some concern there are bumps, but long term, I mean, if we step back and think about energy transition broadly, this will be the biggest deployment of capital in human history. And so the idea that we're going to do that through a filter of tax equity is just silly. And so, yeah, eventually we have to get to a place where there's a much freer flow of capital from traditional capital sources and from large traditional capital sources that aren't going to work through unnecessarily complex processes to get there.
I mean, I'll say this: a few miles away from Wall Street, I think there was a study done a few years ago that said that the 30% ITC is actually a very inefficient mechanism to inefficient use of federal resources to actually incentivize the deployment of solar. I believe 60% of it, of the benefits of the ITC, actually goes straight to the investor. And other processes along that chain, and only 30 to 40% of it goes to the actual project.
Great, thank you. We have time for one more question. Yes.
Hi, my name is Marina Yathmas. I work at Duke University. So in following up on the question about the development of assets internationally, specifically in solar, if you look at the markets that are growing, for instance, in East Africa, a lot of that is residential, very, very, very high volume, low margin. Now, if we look at the commercial scale or even utility scale, that's not being done very often. I think Rwanda or Ghana, they just did their first utility scale project, and it's the largest in East Africa. So if we talk about financing those projects and de-risking those projects, what innovative financing mechanisms do you see on the horizon to do that?
Sundays is taking leadership here.
Yeah, well, we have an international yield co that we're contemplating, so that that vehicle would be applicable to projects obviously outside of the U.S. Credit is going to be key, is most financing. So that'll be the sort of, but there is no market that we wouldn't look at. I'm sure but it's got to be a good regulatory environment. A stable environment where your cash flows are protected for the long term.
Well, and where we see those projects successful at scale, it's often with the support of credit enhancement agencies, export credit, OPICs, European Development Bank, Asian Development Bank. And so being able to leverage some other mechanism to manage both the cost, as you put the cost of capital against the risk, and also down managing the risk based on some ways to share the risk with NGOs or other governments.
I mean, from our perspective, and we're very excited about, obviously we're have a large part of our business is in Canada, so we are already international. But we see a lot of growth in all the markets, but it's no different from any other traditional power sector, gas-fired, or any other in terms of, the representative from AES can discuss the historic success of dealing with PPAs with foreign countries or foreign utilities. It's the same analysis that you'd have if you were building a gas-fired plant in any country. And I think that there are lots of smart people in this room who have done a lot of that. So I would say it's the same exact path. I don't think solar's different.
Great. Thank you very much. And look, as reviewing some of my notes here from our discussion, I think one of the main points was access, right? Community shared solar do that at the residential and commercial level. Non-investment grade counterparties provide solar access to a segment of the industry that's been underserved. There seems to be a healthy sense of optimism about the post-ITC environment and kind of ways that all the energy professionals in this room can stay busy and develop a lot more solar. And look, the 175,000 jobs is outstanding. And so look, I want to thank everyone for taking the time this morning to discuss solar with us. Certainly think we could probably stay here all morning and continue the conversation, but don't want to get in the way of some healthy solar networking. So I just want to take a minute to thank Dixon Peabody, our host, Tawana Lewis, and the EnerKnol team for organizing today's discussion and certainly this outstanding event for our industry. And last but certainly not least, our outstanding panelists this morning, Eli, Laura, Min, and Mike, for their time and insights. Thank you very much.